Hi, I'm Travis Wayne Goodsell, and this is part 2 of Last Day's Warning to LDS Mormons from one of your own before April General Conference 2018, and then thus part 2. It took me 45 minutes to save the part 1 file. So it's going to be a long night, and we're only not even at noon yet. Right now the march is most likely proceeded and is being covered on every news station, and this is all part and parcel with what's going on in these days, in these last days. Because it's going to take so long to upload onto YouTube, I'm going to make them available on my store page in my videos section first, and of course they'll be able to be downloaded for free. And I'll even convert these into an audio presentation, though it's going to be difficult to know what I'm talking about when I'm referring to pictures like the ones in the background. But my website won't be able to handle the 2.14 gigs that part 1 alone has in storage space. But it will be available to download from my store instantly, depending on how long it takes your system to download. And then once I get this stuff on YouTube, if you know of other sites that download YouTube videos, you can utilize those to download my video as well, and go from there. But yeah, 2.15 gigs is quite large, especially taking 45 minutes to save. But anyway, let's get going with this next hour-long video. And I wanted to bring up something that I forgot to include in my discussion in the last video. But first we'll sum up the first video by simply saying Book of Mormon, good precepts, exposes bad. That sums up the first lecture. And the part I was talking about is Article of Faith number 8. We should understand that the Bible is not translated correctly in the King James Version. I can't emphasize that over and over again. Too many people read the Book of Mormon and compare it with the Bible, and they get all excited. Oh, it's exactly the same! Didn't you guys go to grade school? Didn't you guys get taught that you can't copy other people's work and claim that it's your own? That if you do use somebody else's quotes, that you've got to reference where the quotes come from, or at least put them in quotes so that they know that it's somebody else's words. So when you see the Book of Mormon exactly the same as in the Bible, especially in the Isaiah chapters, you've got to question. You can't just say, oh, it's great, the Lord reveals the exact same words to the exact same prophets at different time periods. And of course I'm being sarcastic, which I've posted on my website, www.travis-wayne-goodsell.weebly.com, that I have a sarcastic sense of humor that I got from The Simpsons, and it's got a British flair to it, as I described on my web post this morning. And mostly that comes from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So that gives you a little insight into where my linguistic manner of speech comes from. Everybody has a linguistic signature, and it's unique that it's not the same as anybody else's, but when we study ourselves and others study us and the other documents and media and records that were available during that person's time frame, you're able to identify where they got their information from. We are not unique in the sense that we create new words, ideas, and concepts. We take them from other people and we rearrange them into our understanding. And as a person who used to watch 8 to 10 hours of TV per day as a child, I have an enormous supply of sources that make up my unique linguistic pattern. So you can't trace it to one show, or maybe even a few shows or documents or whatever. You've got to identify each and every single thing that I exposed myself to in order to trace my linguistic speech. Anciently, it was a lot easier, and it is a lot easier for us now to be able to identify the source for a person's linguistic speech, because they didn't have the audio and video recordings and the mass production of books that we now have. So information was limited to certain groups and certain classes of people who were privileged, as you might say, to have access to other people's records. And so that explains why the Egyptian language, for the most part, was untouched for several millennia. You get the alphabet that breaks off from it, and my research shows the linguistic pattern taken from the Egyptian language. That's unique, or my discovery that I had made, and have published numerous books on the subject. And so, yeah, it's easier to identify where sources came from. So I can identify in the narrative of Genesis in the Bible that those stories came from Egyptian documents, Egyptian hieroglyphs even. That was my big discovery with Egyptian, is that the documents, you translate all the text, and they figured that out with the Rosetta Stone, but they weren't translating, they still haven't translated to this day, the pictures that accompany the text. And I'm the one who made the discovery that you gotta also translate the pictures that accompany the text, because that gives you further insight into the mind of the author of the particular document on papyri. In section 91, verse 2 in the Doctrine and Covenants, I didn't bring up interpolations of men. That goes hand in hand with Article of Faith number 8, indicating that the Bible was not translated correctly. It's not just the Apocrypha that has interpolations of men, it's the whole of the Bible that has interpolations of men. And, thus the reason why Joseph Smith was coming up with a revision, which is incorrectly called a Joseph Smith translation of the Bible. And so the two scriptures, Article of Faith number 8 and section 91 verse 2, go hand in hand into helping us understand what happened to the Bible and how we are to do our study and research on the Bible. And we don't stop at the biblical text itself, even if you go to the biblical Hebrew text and the Greek text for the New Testament. You've got to find the source origin for the linguistics. And that's what I've done by identifying the Egyptian source documents that accompany the narratives in Genesis. And others, such as D.M. Murdoch, who passed away in 2015 from cancer, she is famous for the Zeitgeist movie, exposing the New Testament Gospels as deriving directly from the Egyptian documents as well. So even though I beat them with my theory for the Old Testament narrative, their discovery with the New Testament Gospels confirms my theory for the Genesis narratives. And as a result of understanding the source origins for the biblical texts, we then can restore the correct translations of the Bible and even insert additional information that was left out of the biblical narratives. And so there's a lot more to the story of Jesus, obviously, because after his whole youth up until he turns 30 is gone. And everybody's wondering, well, what happened? What did he do? And there are other extra biblical texts that give insight into what happened. And then you can also utilize historical information to figure out what would have happened. For example, the Romans had established a law requiring Jews of 18 years of old to join the military. That was also the time when Jews got married, or male Jews got married. And yeah, the whole controversy of 14-year-old girls goes back to that day where Mary, the mother of Jesus, would most likely have been a 14-year-old girl. And there's cultural understandings in history that we need to study and research before we get a better understanding of the scriptural texts as they were transmitted to us today. So I needed to make that clear before we get into all of this, is that what the Book of Mormon was trying to do was correct some, if not many, of the biggest issues of incorrect translation in the Bible. And I'm way over time for segment 1 here. Okay, as I've indicated that this video has to do is a warning to LDS Mormon members and it's specifically designed to inform you and warn you a week before conference. So to give you a little background of conference history, in the beginning of the church, the prophets and apostles would speak in conference off the cuff, whatever comes to their mind. And there were scribes who would record their information on paper, and then those authors or speakers, would edit their work to verify accuracy as best as possible. So the concept now that the Journal of Discourses is fake is not really as fake as our leaders are leading us to believe. The Adam God theory of Brigham Young was actually the Adam God doctrine that he put forward. It was not a mistake. It was not a misediting or miswriting of the scribes. He actually put forth that doctrine. And there are numerous other records of him having done this. In particular, the temple text that he himself wrote out for the St. George Temple, that included the Adam God doctrine in it. And of course that was later changed. Then we get into a time where prophets realized we should probably write our own work and not rely on scribes to tell people what we're saying. And so the prophets and apostles would write their own texts. Elder Haight, however, was one of those stubborn ones who never wrote any of his talks. He just got up there and started rambling off on whatever came to his mind at that time. And there are many instances still recorded on the conference talks that they had to come up and tap him on the shoulder, telling him his time was up. And then they eventually thought of the idea, well, we'll put a watch up on the podium, and that still wasn't working, and so then they had to put a red signal beeper to go off when it was time to end. And so he was quite a character. Then there was the Elder Pullman scandal that was reported by the Salt Lake Tribune by the same woman who was asked or invited to attend the press conference of President Nelson in his new appointment as president of the church. And she was to give one question that the presidency had a scripted response. You can go back and watch the video of that press conference, and you can watch as President Nelson is supposed to be answering that Elder Oaks, to his right, is mouthing his comments before he says them. So you know that the whole thing was scripted, and it makes for an enlightening understanding when they left out in their scripted response an important part of the question that the Salt Lake Tribune reporter was asking, and she had to then speak up and remind them of the question that they were supposed to ask, or talk about. Then after that scandal of Elder Pullman's, and you can find this on the internet, the church still has the edited version. They didn't bother to go back and put in his original conference talk. They left the edited version that they paid thousands of dollars to redo, left on the records of the church, in the ensign and in the video, and on, yeah, his talk was discussing the difference between the church and the gospel, and the edited version that was redone merged them as one and the same, that the church and the gospel are the same and interchangeable. Whereas he was trying to say, there are certain traditions that we have as members that do not necessarily reflect the actual gospel, and we need to be cautious and wary of that, so that we don't start believing traditions as doctrine. And I can point out myriads of Mormon traditions that have now become doctrine, and that's a huge scandal in this church. If Mormons actually realized that what they thought was doctrine was actually a traditional belief, I brought out in the last one the birth date of Jesus. The 6th of April is a Mormon tradition. It is not factual. It is not in harmony with the Book of Mormon. And so we have allowed to creep in a traditional belief and claim it as doctrinal fact. And that needs to stop. And then after that scandal, the church then had a secret committee assigned to edit the words of the prophets. These were regular members, and they were telling the prophets what to say in general conference. And that from one controversy to another is what we see happening here. And now, in the last few years, we've learned that the prophets are writing their own talks now. Again, there's no indication of a committee editing them, but they're now claiming over the pulpit in general conference that not only do they not know the doctrine and have to refer their questions to BYU professors, which I've already indicated in the last video, that they're apologists. They're not scholars. Apologists outly declare themselves as non-scientific. They will not do scientific methods or research on anything. They are solely for the purpose of defending the church through deception and lies. That is apologies. There were apologies that crept up after the apostles died. These apologists did the exact same thing. They defended the church's position in its fallen state by lying and deceiving to the people about their doctrines. And so you get hundreds of different churches, all with hundreds of different creeds to go with each church, and they all adopted one of the hundreds of gospels that were rewritten during that time frame by these apologists. And the Gospels that we have are only 4 of the hundreds that were available at the time frame. There are numerous ones, and some of them have come out: the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Judas, Gospel of Philip, and others, and so forth. And but these apologists were dictating the doctrine for their specific church, and they were forming churches based on their apologies. And so for the prophets to get up at the pulpit of conference and tell us that they're getting their doctrinal answers to questions they have from LDS apologists, that's just horrifying to me, that they don't bother to do the research and study themselves. They're going to people that knowingly lie for the church. And then you have the prophets. I'll get into that later. So, hey, we got past the first page finally. So we'll go on to section 3. Okay, now as we get closer to General Conference, we can recall having been raised up under the beliefs that any and all revelation from the prophets would be given to us at General Conference. The only problem is that there has not been any new revelation given in General Conference since the death of Joseph Smith. Now you might say, well, what about this change and that change and the policy there and the policy here? And we just had the women get moved to October Saturday session, and the men are only in the April Saturday session. That is not revelation. That is a policy change, an administrative decision. Any business that is worth a dime makes those exact same kinds of decisions, and they don't have priesthood authority. They're not a religion. They're a business. It's all built around money making. And so I'm talking about actual revelations. And the revelation in section 138 of the Brighamite Doctrine and Covenants, because there are at least 80 other divisions of Mormonism, and several of them have their own versions of the Doctrine and Covenants, and so it's kind of ignorant on our part to think that we have the only Doctrine and Covenants. The section 138 in our Doctrine and Covenants is by Joseph Fielding Smith Sr., but he did not put that in there. He did not give that over the pulpit in conference. That was put in later by another president of the church. And so there really hasn't been new revelations by any of the prophets claiming to be seers. And that is very strange and disturbing. And we'll discuss that in more detail later on. But what's significant is that we have been told in Doctrine and Covenants, section 45, verses 39 to 44. Look it up. Read it. In verse 39, it says that we must be looking for the signs in the heavens and the earth for the last days. We're supposed to be looking. And then in verse 44, this is the crucial one. This is where people do not understand when they attack and criticize and gaslight me and all other abuses that are done to me for having done as I've been commanded by Scripture, and that is, look for the stellar signs of the latter days. And that is that if you are not looking, you are going to be excommunicated. That's pretty bold. It says in the Scripture, cut off. That means excommunicated. This is a serious matter. Looking for the signs of the last days in the heavens is given supreme urgency. And I've been the only one doing it. I'm the only one who's done the research. I'm the only one who knows the ancient manner of interpreting the heavens. And yet, you look to the prophets who claim that they are the only ones that we should be looking for to give us new revelations, and everybody says, I'm going to wait for the prophet to tell me if these signs are the signs that we're supposed to be looking for. I don't think you fully understand what is going on, because you wouldn't say such a thing if you fully understood that your unsound logic is going to do you damage. Because if you are not looking, you will be excommunicated. This is very clear. And in our current presidency, they're not going to excommunicate people. And so what does the Scripture mean that we're going to be excommunicated because we didn't look? And when you understand the bigger picture of what is going to happen, you'll realize, oh, I see. But that's how it is. You have to have faith until you produce the fruit. Once you discover the fruit, then you understand the big picture. And you understand no more walking in light rather than the darkness of faith. How many of you are looking? Probably none of you. You don't even know. So in the next segment, I'm going to try to do a video presentation showing you the stellarium and how that works with the particular signs that we've had. And again, we've had conferences since 2014 when the signs began, and not a single prophet or president of the church has warned us or indicated to us that those are the actual signs prophesied in Scripture. And you can, gaslight it and say, well, it's because they're not the signs. Well, if you studied the signs, you would know that these particular signs that we're experiencing will never happen again. This is it. Do you understand? This is it. And I can go into the secret combination society that has taken over the entire world and is planning to destroy us. But that's not the point of this lecture, and I'll end up going on for days rather than hours. One thing I want to point out is the Joseph Smith translation or revision of Revelation 12. They did not put it as footnoted Scripture. It's a separate book just thrown into our quad. So you've actually got to go to the book and read the additional information for Revelation 12. And you will then find out that Joseph Smith is saying that the stellar signs, as recorded by John, are symbols of events that are to happen on earth. That is astrology. Everybody is under the impression that astrology bad. Again, you got to look in context. You've got to understand Article of Faith number 8 and Doctrine and Covenants 91 verse 2. Ancient astrology is not the same as modern astrology. Ancient Egyptian astrology was not the same as ancient Babylonian astrology. And if you don't understand the distinction between modern and ancient, you're definitely not going to understand the difference between the two different ancient cultures. And so what Joseph Smith is declaring as scriptural doctrine for Mormons is that we are to be astrologers, that we are to look for the stellar signs. You can't look for something if you don't know what you're supposed to be looking for. And the scriptures do give us a few signs, but we're told there's going to be others that are not recorded, but will be signs nevertheless. And I'm only going to be going over in this next segment the ones that we do know: the sun, moon, stars, and the Revelation 12 signs. So we'll see if I can be successful on this next segment. Okay, I hope this is recording, because when I have my Stellarium program up, I don't see the recording bar off to the side. So you'll have to work with me, but I should have programmed it so that you can hear my voice as I move around the screen here in the program, and you should be able to see the cursor. This is the Stellarium.org program. Remember the org if you're going to get it for yourself. It shows down here Earth at this location, which is the center of the United States, and it's got all these different features that you can utilize, as well as all these features as well. What I usually utilize is this one right here with the sun peeking over the clouds. That turns it into nighttime when it's daytime. And then I'll do this one if I want to eliminate the grass, and we'll keep it here for now. And then I'll do these, which are highlighting the constellations. That shows the constellation pictures. This one shows the stars within the constellations, or actually the names of the constellations, sorry. And then this one gives you the stars that connect in the constellation themselves. And then I'll bring the date time window, bring that one up, and if we want from where we are, you go to this top one here, location window. See it right there? That's the location that it automatically defaults to, is the center of the United States. And you can select anywhere in the world. And if you go back in time, you've got to use the current name for the location. You can't use the ancient name. It doesn't have it in its files. And so that's one of the drawbacks. And so for now, I think we'll leave it in the center of the United States. But just to let you know. Okay, so now we can see that it shows the exact time under the Gregorian calendar. If we wanted the Julian calendar, we just click on that, but that was a failed attempt of a calendar that lasted for a somewhat brief period of time. Excuse me. So we can go forward and backward by clicking on the arrows above or below for the year, the month, and the day. And then we can even adjust the time frame for the hour, minute, and second. But we need to get to the video presentation rather than fooling around with a demonstration of how this Stellarium program works. The first sign that we'll look up is the sign of the sun. It's told in scriptures in several different locations, Joel, Matthew, and Revelation, that the sun will be darkened. And we just had one last year in August, and it was the 21st. Now, whose birthday was on August 21st of... That's right, President Monson. So it's not a coincidence that he was having his birthday on the total solar eclipse. That was prophesied to happen. And we need to pull the screen down so that we can see the constellation. Okay, there we go. Alright, the zodiac are 12 major constellations that go around and around the earth, whereas the others are pretty much stationary in their location because they're not on the zodiac. But we need to get to where the solar eclipse took place. There she is. You can see the moon, and that's the dark black mark, and there's the sun, the big white mark, and there's the star Regulus. Regulus is in the constellation of Leo, the lion symbol, and is known as the king star. So here you're having a total eclipse of the sun over the king star. If you know your Egyptian history and doctrine and theology and mythology and whatever have you, you will understand that the sun represents the right eye of Horus, also called the eye of Ra. The moon represents the left eye of Horus, or the eye of Thoth. And those are different deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Horus is the main one to concern yourself with. He is the son of Osiris and Isis. Osiris is the one who was murdered by his brother Set, or Seth, and Set then usurped the kingdom from the deceased Osiris, and it is Horus who symbolically has to flee into the wilderness with his mother until he's grown up, and then he returns to do battle with Set, his uncle, to restore the throne and kingdom of his deceased father. Now you can recognize some comparisons with Jesus, but Horus, as a Christian personage, it's completely unknown to everybody. But let's get it more centralized here. So this was a huge symbolism known to the Egyptians. They prophesied this event all the way millennia ago, at least 6,000 years ago. That is revelation. That is the ability of a seer. They didn't have this stellarium program to look into the future or the past. They actually had to study night after night after night the movements of the heavens and all the objects therein to be able to know with tremendous accuracy how to make their calendars. And they had a civil calendar and a religious calendar. And as a result, they knew of the date in the future of when this particular sign would occur. And this symbolizes the battle between Horus and Set. Now, obviously, there is no Horus and Set by that name on the earth at this time. They are symbolic names for the individuals who represent them. A thing I need to point out is that on this date, August 21st, 2017, is the new year in the Egyptian religious calendar. The civil calendar new year is always April 19th. Year after year, April 19th. But the religious calendar changes. And so this is significant, and why they were able to prophesy of this sign in the heavens more than 6,000 years ago. And so, this is the sign of the sun talked about in the Bible, and that was carried over into our scriptures in the Doctrine and Covenants. Okay, the sign of the moon. I revealed it to you in the last program. That was on January 31st, 2018. Now this is going to be a little bit trickier because full moons or lunar eclipses occur during full moons, and the full moon isn't with the sun in the sky. So you have to have additional insight as to when a lunar eclipse will happen, because this program itself will not reveal it to you. I'm trying to bring the screen down and it's not cooperating. There we go. We still have the moon missing. So let's eliminate the grass. And we still don't have it because it's up yonder. Come on. Okay. Well, we're going to have to switch east and west and make them north and south so that we can get the moon. There's the moon in the constellation of Cancer, the crab. And during this time, it was actually, let's click on the moon. There's 99%, so we need to go earlier in the morning. Okay, there. See, full moon now. It's in phase 1, full moon status, 100% illuminated at 7:47 in the morning on the 31st of January 2018 in the center of the United States, in the constellation of Cancer. That's when the lunar eclipse took place. And we call it the super blood blue moon because it was the second full moon in the month, and so it's called a blue moon. The ancients had a different calendar of days in a month, so they wouldn't have known that we would have changed our calendar to eliminate that understanding. And so the blue moon is an added feature in modern times with the modern calendar. However, it being the second supermoon of the month is, however, significant. And so the past couple of years we've had several supermoons. The biggest of the supermoons was back in November 2016, just after the presidential election, which is significant. Okay, so this was the setting for the sign of the moon darkening. And the symbol for the stars, we got to go back to President Monson's death day. Okay, I think we can. No, the moon is still, yeah, it's a supermoon. Okay, so there's the moon. It's in Gemini rather than Cancer, so it's a constellation away, and it's a supermoon. And this was the night that President Monson died. We can go up to the evening time, but yeah, you can see it was no longer a supermoon when he died. It was immediately after that night. So the first was technically the supermoon, carrying over into the 2nd of January. But what I want to indicate to you are the signs that are going in the center area of constellation or clustering of stars. So we'll zoom in. Okay. And as you can see, Jupiter and Mars are in conjunction with each other. Mars just barely reached the top of the scales of Libra, the scales of judgment. The book of Judges, I want to bring to your attention. This constellation symbol has everything to do with the book of Judges. They are all prophecies of the latter days. Samson. The movie just came out in theaters on the 15th of March. I hope you guys take the time to watch it. And if not, go to your scriptures and read the story of Samson. Symbolic of Horus, the son of Osiris. And we'll discuss who the Horus character is among these planets a little later on here. Well, in just a second. So, on the time of President Monson's death, let's go to evening time. 21:22. Okay, and so now we need to Alright. So there's the moon. And there's the other guys. Okay. Okay, so you see Mars is right there at the star at the top of the constellation Libra. If you know anything about Egyptian, there's what's called the judgment scene. The judgment scene is the Egyptian temple endowment ritual. It has the scales in the center of the glyph, and a person's heart is weighed on the scales. At the top of the scales is the feather of truth and order, called Ma'at. And so this is all Egyptian symbol going on right here, with President Monson dying, and yet Mars is at the top of the scale of judgment. So this incredibly significant. Verse. Okay, this was when Monson wasn't pronounced dead. Was right now. And so there's the sign of Monson's death. But what's also interesting is that if we, let's see, you got to find the dragon constellation. And we're going to have to do some switching around. Okay, there's Draco right there. Guess what is at his tail? This is Draco the Dragon constellation, and at his tail are the quadrantids. Every year, the first week of January, we have the quadrantid meteor showers. So it looks like from Earth that the sky is falling from the tail of the dragon. And guess what? It's the date of President Monson's death. Are you starting to see a connection? You may not fully understand all the symbolisms that are going on here until you study Egyptian and study the ancient Egyptian astrology and the symbol interpretations and how they developed their mythology based on the movements of the heavens. So that John the Revelator would then record these movements as a future prophecy for events on earth to occur. So John the Revelator, when he says in Revelation 12 that from the tail of the dragon will shoot down to earth the stars in the heavens, this is what he's referring to. And in the context of the other signs that John is talking about with the woman and the dragon, you'll get a better understanding of why all of this ties together and is so significant. So we need to adjust things here. So, the sign of the woman that John the Revelator talks about in Revelation 12. For that, we got to go to 2017 and September 23rd. What happened on September 23rd? That's right. The Relief Society held their last women's session of conference separate from the regular general session. And afterwards, they then announced that the women would only be in the October Saturday session of conference from then on out. So there you have the sign of the woman on the day of the woman's last woman's session of General Conference, which President Monson was the one who changed it so that the women's session was a part of General Conference. And we need to get out of this. There's the moon. So we need to go back a little bit. Okay, there's the constellation we want. Now we got to get it center stage here. There we go. Okay. This is the sign that John the Revelator talks about in Revelation 12, first and foremost, the sign of the woman. She is clothed with the sun. This only happens once a year. And so John the Revelator is telling us that this is going to happen at a specific time of the year. When you're discussing movements of the stars in the heavens, you're discussing calendar dates in the future. Or present day. You know, if you have a tsunami that wipes out your village, and you record that a tsunami wiped out your village, you would use the signs in the heavens to indicate the date on which that occurred. You have the crown of 12 stars. Leo, naturally, or anciently rather, had identified with it 9 stars. Obviously, there are billions upon trillions of stars in this location of the constellation, but our ancients designated 9 specific stars for the constellation of Leo. So anybody who tries to tell you that Leo has 12 stars or other stars than 9, they don't know what they're talking about, and they're trying to deceive you and take you away from the true interpretation that John the Revelator is trying to point out to you. So the constellation of 12 stars is on the head of the woman, thus Leo. Leo is the symbol of the Jews, or the 12 tribes of Israel. And so only 9 are included here, so we have to add 3 more stars. Those obviously are then moving stars, which we call planets. And you'll see that they're all lined up with Regulus leading the pack. You have Regulus, Venus, Mars, which we saw in the previous sign at Monson's death being at the top of the judgment symbol, and so that identifies Mars during this time period as President Nelson. If you'll remember, the blood moon tetrad from 2014 to 2015, after the 3rd blood moon, which occurred Saturday morning of General Conference 2015, after that and up until the 4th concluding blood moon was not only Passover, but it was also that time period in between the two blood moons of the deaths of 3 of our apostles, Elder Packer, Elder Scott, and I can see his face and I can't remember his name, but we lost 3 apostles during this time frame, and President Packer was one of them. And as a result, President Nelson was added as the president of the 12, and we picked up 3 more apostles to the quorum of the 12. So the 12 stars on the crown of the woman indicates that the woman is the church, the crown is the 12 apostles. And so President Monson is represented as the woman. Excuse me. So when Monson died, President Nelson was right there at the top of the constellation of Libra, which is the scales of judgment, to take his place as successor to the church. See how fun and fascinating this all is? Okay, and then there's the moon. It was a waxing crescent on this day. And there it is at the feet of the woman. And a waxing crescent means that it's growing. It's at the quarter phase. Alright, and then the woman is supposed to be giving birth to who John calls the man-child. In Revelation 12 is all Egyptian symbolism, all based on Egyptian scripture. The woman fleeing into the wilderness to protect her unborn child, to raise him in the wilderness, and then be born to be the ruler of the world. That all comes from the Egyptian core myth of Osiris being murdered by his brother Set, represented as the dragon in John's Revelation, and the son of Osiris doing battle with Set to take back the kingdom. Now you would think that Joseph Smith had restored the church and kingdom of God on the earth, so why do we need somebody else in the future to come and restore the church? I'm going to get to that later on. Hold that thought. Okay, so this right here, Jupiter, is the man-child. And notice it's Jupiter. Jupiter is the head god of the Romans. Zeus is his counterpart in the Greek religion. Yahweh is his counterpart in the Jewish religion. And the Christians have nobody for him. They would claim that it's Jesus, but Jesus is actually Osiris, and therefore is the one who impregnated the woman who represents the church. And so Jupiter is the son of Jesus, the man-child being the son of Jesus. So this is another person that has been left out of clear understanding in the scriptures. So when I referred to the Article of Faith number 8, the Bible is not translated correctly, and merged it with section 91 verse 2, that there are interpolations in the Bible by the hands of men, this is what was removed was an understanding of this character right here. And this date is when he emerged from the womb of the woman. He had been in her womb since November of 2016. And I'm probably going way over time explaining this, and this is going to take me some time before I get to the next segment, and this may actually be the rest of part 2 video. Let's see. I need to get the sign of the dragon here before I leave the stellarium. So we need to go to December 17th. Anybody know the Jewish holiday during this period of time? Right, it was Hanukkah. And specifically on the 17th of December 2017, it was considered the dark day. See, we're at phase 0. The moon is new. It's dark. And look, we have 5 planets: Mercury, Venus, Moon, Saturn, and the Sun, all at the tail of the Serpent constellation. It's split in half with Ophiuchus. Ophiuchus was known anciently as the 13th constellation, and was considered symbolically the throne of God. That will come into other significance as you study all of what I've been trying to publish and post and talk about. In John's Revelation 12, there are 10 stars at the tail. Serpens only has 5 stars, so that needed 5 roaming planetary bodies at its tail to constitute 10 stars. And then here's the head, and look, on the head of Serpens is the Corona Borealis. I grew up in Corona, California. That's where I went to high school. Was in Norco High School, right across the I think it was the 5th, no, it wasn't the 15, whatever freeway divides the land, Corona from Norco. Norco is, well, Corona means crown, and so here you have the crown on the head of the serpent, exactly as described by John the Revelator. Now you need to understand, these conjunctions do not occur on a regular basis. All of these conjunctions that I've been pointing out to you are rare. And some of them are so rare they don't happen for at least 10,000 years, plus or minus 10,000 years in either direction, forward or backward in time. You can do it as a math formula to figure out when it would occur again, but you then have to figure out the tilting of the Earth's axis, which has the North Star in different locations, so that the planet's zodiac is altered a bit, and during the day, and it gets complicated when you add more and more millennia to the equation. So what we're looking at are events that were prophesied to occur at a specific date in the future. And I hope you guys understand the importance of this and how significant they are, and for all of them to be occurring during the same time frame of just a couple of years apart, or a couple of years in span, and even months in span, makes this a never occurring again event. This is a once ever event that we are experiencing now in our day. That's how we can be fully assured that these are the last days, and these are the signs that were prophesied to happen in the last days. Okay, so I think that covers the sun, moon, stars, signs, and all three revelation signs. And there have been more signs, as I pointed out, that as Mars gets closer to, let's see, 18, we lost Libra. It's going to take me too much time to find it and arrange it and all that stuff, so yeah, there have been other signs that have been occurring, and I've been reporting on them as they happen. So, yeah, I mean, that gets us to our talk with conference. Why aren't the seers, the prophets, revealing to the members of the church that these signs are occurring, let alone in advance, so that we could have been prepared? You know, Amos 3:7, which I'll get into more detail later, talks about, you know, the words of God, the secrets of God, are to be revealed. They're not to be kept a secret. And so to have prophets say, you better behave and listen to us, you know, and not tell us the secrets of God, that automatically tells us that they are not true seers of God. They are being kept silent. And so that is that for this section, and we'll get into the next section here, or the next video, whichever comes first.